My name is Margaret Hensley, and the morning I saw survey flags staked through my family's cemetery, I thought the world had lost its mind. Bright orange ribbons fluttered over the graves, little plastic markers slicing through generations of silence. The land that held my husband, my parents, and my grandparents had been measured like a future parking lot. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Maybe the county was updating records or checking boundaries. But then I saw the truck, a white Ford, with Crossland Development printed on the side, and a man in a hard hat holding a clipboard, calling out coordinates. "Move the stake to the west corner," he shouted. My husband, Robert's headstone, was the west corner. I stood frozen behind the old split-rail fence, the cold March wind cutting through my sweater. "Hey," I called out, walking closer. "What are you doing here?" The man turned polite but distant. "Just a survey, ma'am. Site's been approved. They'll start grading next week." "Grading?" My voice cracked. "This is a cemetery." He looked at me blankly. "Not for long, I guess." My heart started to hammer. I pulled out my phone and called my son. "Ethan," I said, breathless. "There are men in the cemetery. They're staking the land." "What's going on?" He sighed like someone too busy for worry. "Mom, I told you I had to sell it. It's just land. You'll see it's for the best." Just land, I could barely get the words out. "Your father's buried there." "I know," he said quietly, "but you can't hold on to everything forever. The taxes, the maintenance, it's too much. This is how we move forward." Then he hung up. I stood there staring at the flags waving in the wind. Move forward. That ground was our past, our blood, our roots. My knees felt weak. I had lived long enough to bury nearly everyone I loved, but nothing prepared me for losing the land that held them. I climbed the short fence and walked through the rows. The grass was wet and cold beneath my shoes. Robert's grave was the same as always. Simple stone, plain lettering, but the space around it looked scarred where the surveyors had hammered their stakes. I knelt beside it, brushed away some mud, and whispered, "I'll fix this. I promise you." When I drove home, the silence in the car was unbearable. At the kitchen table, I sat down with the folder labeled Property and Taxes. I remembered Ethan asking me to sign some papers years ago, right after Robert's stroke. Just routine maintenance stuff, he'd said. "You don't need to worry." Inside the folder, I found documents I didn't recognize, pages filled with legal language, notarized stamps, and my signature. Power of attorney. Transfer of deed. It looked official. Too official. I felt the blood drain from my face. I poured myself coffee, then let it go cold as I read every line. It turned out that by signing those papers, I'd given Ethan full control over the property. Every grave, every inch. I called him again, straight to voicemail. That night, I sat in the dark living room with the old tin box Robert had kept in the attic. It held his letters, a few receipts, and one yellowed envelope I hadn't seen before. On the front in his handwriting were the words, "If the land ever moves." The rest of the line was smudged. I opened it. Inside was a note that read, "Some things can't be bought twice, Margaret. If you ever feel the ground shift beneath our names, remember, the law isn't the only truth." I didn't understand what he meant then, but the words lit something inside me, a small, fierce spark that felt like Robert himself had just whispered, "Get up." The next morning I went back to the site. The survey crew was still there, mapping, measuring. This time, I didn't shout. I just watched them work, memorizing every detail. The company logo, the license plate number, the stack of blueprints on the hood of the truck. One of the younger men, no older than 25, glanced at me awkwardly. "Ma'am, are you family?" I nodded. every one of them. He hesitated, lowering his eyes. Then, I'm sorry. That night I spread the papers across my table again. Between the legal terms and signatures, I noticed something small at the bottom of one form, a line that read, Monroe County Parcel, number 142B Transfer, recorded December 2nd. Recorded? That meant there was a paper trail. I turned to Robert's old envelope again, his handwriting steady even after all these years. The law isn't the only truth. Maybe not, but it was a place to start. I made up my mind that night. I wasn't going to let my son's mistake become our family's erasure. If there was a way to stop that sale through law, through memory, through sheer will, I'd find it. Outside the porch, light flickered on, bathing the yard in soft yellow. For 20 years, that light had always come on at sunset, like Robert's quiet way of saying, I'm home. And I decided then that I wasn't done guarding home, not yet. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The air in the house felt colder than usual, though it was probably just nerves. The folder with the property papers still sat open on the kitchen table, and beside it lay Robert's yellowed letter. Its words burned into my thoughts. The law isn't the only truth. I poured coffee black and strong and stared out the window toward the faint outline of the trees beyond the yard. Somewhere past those woods, men with clipboards were staking out my family's resting place like it was a vacant lot. By 7 o'clock, I was standing outside the Monroe County Recorder's office downtown. The building was small brick walls, a flagpole out front, and a faded sign that had probably hung there since the 1970s. Inside, the air smelled like paper and old dust. Behind the counter sat a middle-aged woman with round glasses and a thermos that said, World's Tiredest Mom. Her name tag read, Wanda. Morning, she said. What can I help you with? I handed her the folder. My son sold our family cemetery. I think there's been some kind of mistake. Her eyebrows rose. Sold a cemetery? That's unusual. It wasn't meant to be sold, I said. The deed was under my husband's name, then transferred to me after he passed. My son had power of attorney temporarily, and I think he used it to sell without my consent. Wanda frowned, then started typing. Her nails clicked fast across the keys. What's the parcel number? I gave her the paper. After a moment, she turned the monitor toward me. There it was. Parcel 142B, recorded December 2nd. Buyer Crossland Development. My stomach turned. It's real then. I'm afraid so, Wanda said softly. It's fully recorded. Transfer looks clean on paper. But, she squinted at the screen. The parcel's labeled as cemetery property. Developers usually need a special exemption for that. That was the first glimmer of hope I'd felt in days. So if they didn't have one, then they're in trouble, she said, almost smiling. You could file for an injunction until it's reviewed. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I nodded like I did. Thank you, Wanda. I appreciate it. On the way home, I called the pastor, Pastor Dale, from the small white church down the road. He'd known Robert perform the funeral himself. His voice crackled through the line, warm but weary. Margaret, he said, you sound troubled. I just found out the land where Robert's buried was sold. Oh, Lord. He was quiet for a moment. I wish I could say I'm surprised. Developers have been buying everything out this way. They're turning it into a housing site. My voice trembled. He promised me that land would stay ours. He sighed. I remember him saying that. Margaret, whatever you do, don't let anger drive you. You'll need strength, not fury. I'm not angry, I said. I'm awake. He paused, then said softly, That's the Margaret I remember. After hanging up, I went back to the cemetery. The survey crew was gone for the day. The flags stood in neat little rows, orange and red against the brown earth. A padlocked chain hung across the entrance now. I stepped over it anyway. The site was quiet, except for the rustle of leaves. I walked the rows slowly, counting the headstones. My parents. Robert's grandparents, my husband, all still there untouched for now. But the thought of them being dug up for concrete made my chest ache. I sat beside Robert's grave until dusk. The air smelled of dirt and pine needles, the kind of scent that never leaves your clothes. I whispered, "You were right to plan ahead, but I need more than your words now. I need your proof." When I got home, I went straight for the attic. The light bulb flickered weakly as I dug through boxes labeled Robert's files. Receipts, taxes, insurance documents, all in his careful handwriting. Then, in a file at the bottom, I found something folded inside a manila envelope, a property map. The paper was yellowed corners, soft from time. Red lines marked the boundaries, and in Robert's handwriting were the words, "Family plot protected by covenant filed, 1993. Covenant. The word hit me like a bell. Robert had been meticulous about paperwork. He must have filed something years ago, something legally binding. I flipped the map over. There was a faint stamp in blue ink, recorded Monroe County, 1993. If that covenant still existed, it could stop everything. I barely slept that night. I sat on the porch in Robert's cardigan, watching the yard fade into silver moonlight. The crickets sang softly in the distance. Somewhere beyond those trees, bulldozers sat waiting for morning. At sunrise, I was back in the car, the covenant map folded neatly in my purse. I stopped by the gas station for coffee, and by sheer luck, Wanda was there too, standing by her pickup, sipping from her thermos. "Wanda," I called, "I need your help again." She blinked, surprised. "You don't waste time, do you?" I showed her the map. "Do you think this covenant is still on record?" She looked it over, eyebrows climbing higher. "If that's really recorded, then yes, developers can't touch it without family consent. That's property law 101. So they can't break ground." "Not without a judge," she said. "Bring it to the office when we open. I'll look it up myself." For the first time since the day the surveyors arrived, I felt like I could breathe. As I drove home, the morning light cut through the fog, glowing pale and golden over the fields. The road curved gently past the cemetery. I slowed down and rolled down my window. The flags still fluttered among the graves, but now they looked less like warnings and more like battle lines. And I whispered to the wind, "Hold on just a little longer, Robert. I'm coming." By the time the county office opened, I was already waiting outside the covenant map, folded carefully in my purse. The air was crisp, and the courthouse square was waking up coffee shops, clattering, someone sweeping a storefront, a dog barking in the distance. For a moment, it felt like any ordinary Indiana morning, but today wasn't ordinary. Wanda greeted me at the door, her thermos in one hand and a key ring in the other. "You're here early again," she said, smiling faintly. "I couldn't sleep," I admitted. "You said you'd help me check that covenant." She unlocked the door, flipped the light switch, and waved me inside. The hum of the computers filled the quiet office. She pulled up the database, fingers moving fast over the keys. "Let's see. Filed 1993, you said." "Yes, my husband's name was Robert Hensley. He drew the map himself." Her screen flickered, and then she let out a soft whistle. "Well, I'll be," she said. "It's here." Recorded March 12, 1993. Restrictive Covenant Family Burial Land. It says, "No sale, transfer, or alteration without written consent of all living Hensley descendants." That's about as solid as it gets. I gripped the edge of the counter. So it's still valid. As long as it was never revoked, and I don't see anything saying it's binding, she said. "Developers hate these. They tie their hands." I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Can you print it?" She nodded, and handed me the warm paper from the printer. I thanked her twice before leaving the covenant tucked safe in my coat pocket. The drive to the construction site was short. The machines were parked by the road, now silent under the morning sun. A group of men stood near a pickup, drinking coffee from paper cups. When they saw me pull up, one of them stepped forward, a man in a suit, slick hair, shiny boots. "Mrs. Hensley?" he asked, glancing at the folder in my hand. "I'm Travis Cole, site manager for Crossland Development. You really shouldn't be out here. It's an active site." I looked past him at the survey stakes poking through the grass. "Active or not, you're standing on my family's graves." He shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I understand this is emotional, but we have all the legal paperwork. The property was sold fair and square. Maybe I said holding up the covenant, but this was recorded before your sale and it's still binding. That means this ground can't be touched without my family's consent." His confident expression faltered. "That's impossible. We checked the records." "Then you didn't check deep enough." He gave a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Our lawyers will be in touch." "Good," I said. "So will mine." Back home, I called Frank Donnelly, the lawyer who had handled Robert's estate. He sounded older now, his voice gravelly but kind. "Margaret Hensley. Well, I'll be. Haven't heard that name in a long time. I need your help, Frank. Robert filed a covenant years ago to protect our family's cemetery. My son sold the land without knowing it existed." "Bring it in," he said without hesitation. "I'll take a look." His office was still where it had always been, on the corner by the hardware store, with a faded sign that read, "Donnelly and Hartman Attorneys at Law." The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. Frank looked just as I remembered, gray hair, tired eyes, tie slightly askew. He spread the covenant across his desk and read every line, lips moving silently. When he finished, he looked up at me. "This is solid, Margaret. As long as the covenant was recorded properly, and it was no developer can override it without family consent. That sale's invalid." I felt a rush of relief so strong it made me dizzy. "So, we can stop them." He nodded slowly. "We can file for a temporary restraining order, then a preliminary injunction. That'll stop construction until the court sorts it out. I'll handle the paperwork." "Thank you, Frank." My voice cracked a little. He smiled. Robert would be proud. Most people would have rolled over by now. When I got home, my phone buzzed. It was Ethan. "Mom, what are you doing?" he said, voice sharp. "I just got a call from some lawyer saying you're freezing the sale. Do you know what that means for me?" "I know exactly what it means," I said. "It means you sold something that never belonged to you." "You don't understand, Mom. I was trying to help us pay the debts, fix the roof, get ahead. I was going to buy it back once the business took off." "You can't buy back blood, Ethan." He went silent. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "I didn't think it mattered to you anymore. It mattered to your father. It still matters to me. And one day it'll matter to you too." He didn't answer. The line went dead. That evening, Frank called again. "I've filed the TRO," he said. "Judge granted it. Construction's on hold. But Margaret, prepare yourself. They'll fight this." "I've been fighting my whole life, Frank," I said. "They just don't know it yet." That night, I stood on the porch with Robert's letter in one hand and the covenant in the other. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint hum of distant traffic. Somewhere, I imagined the men from Crossland pacing in their offices, realizing they'd picked the wrong widow to underestimate. When I finally went inside, I placed the covenant beside Robert's photograph on the mantel. His eyes, steady, kind, unflinching, seemed to look right back at me. "You saw this coming, didn't you?" I whispered. "Well, I'm here now, and I'm not letting them take it." The following week, the world went quiet, too quiet. The trucks were gone from the cemetery road, the crew dismissed until the lawyers sorted things out. But I knew silence didn't mean surrender. It meant they were regrouping. Frank had filed the preliminary injunction 2 days after the temporary restraining order was approved. It bought us time, maybe a few weeks, maybe more. But he warned me developers don't back down easy. They'll come for a hearing. You'll have to stand up in court, Margaret. I'd never set foot in a courtroom before. But for Robert, for the family buried in that ground, I'd go if I had to. 3 days later, the pounding on my front door nearly rattled the glass. I opened it to find Ethan standing there, shoulders tense, eyes red. He looked like he hadn't slept. "Mom, what are you doing?" he demanded. "I'm being threatened with a lawsuit. They're saying I committed fraud." I took a deep breath, holding the door open just enough. "You forged my signature, Ethan. You told them I agreed to sell." His voice rose. "Because you wouldn't have listened. You never listen. You care more about a bunch of graves than your own son." I stared at him, stunned by the bitterness in his voice. "That bunch of graves is your father, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. You think money can replace them." He laughed sharply, a sound that hurt to hear. "You think you're better than me because you live in the past. You're stuck, Mom. That land is just dirt. I was trying to build a future." My hands trembled, but my voice stayed calm. "You can't build a future on broken promises." He looked at me for a long moment, jaw tight, eyes glossy, and then turned and walked away. The slam of his truck door echoed down the road long after he was gone. That night, I sat alone on the porch. The spring wind carried the smell of rain and fresh-turned soil. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled. I thought about Ethan's face, the anger and shame tangled together, and about how Robert would have handled it. He was always better at reaching people. I just wanted my son back, not the man who lied, but the boy who used to run through the cornfields barefoot, laughing like he owned the sky. The next morning, I drove out to the cemetery again. A lock still hung across the gate, but I stepped over it. The air was damp and heavy. Mud clung to my shoes as I walked toward Robert's grave. I stopped halfway when I noticed something strange, fresh dirt, near the headstone, a small mound the size of a shoebox. I knelt, brushed the soil away, and found a rusted metal clasp. Carefully, I dug around it until I pulled up a small tin box, the kind Robert used to keep his fishing lures in. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were a few old photographs, a folded letter, and a tiny key wrapped in tissue. The letter was addressed to me, Margaret. If you're reading this, something's gone wrong. I filed that covenant to protect our land, but paper doesn't mean much if no one remembers why it mattered. If the ground moves, it's because someone forgot their roots. Remind them. Show them that family isn't just blood, it's promise. If the law fails, let truth stand in its place. Robert. Tears blurred the ink before I could finish. I held the letter to my chest, letting the wind dry my face. The tiny key caught the light in my hand, glinting gold. I didn't know what it opened, but I knew Robert meant for me to find it. Later that afternoon, I met Frank at his office. The hearing had been scheduled for Friday morning. They'll have 3 attorneys, he warned, and a stack of paperwork that could fill this room. Let them, I said. I have something stronger. I showed him the letter and the box. He read it quietly, then smiled. Robert always was a smart man. That letter isn't legal evidence, but it's powerful testimony. You bring it to court, Margaret. Let them hear your voice. Friday came cold and gray. The courthouse smelled faintly of lemon polish and old coffee. My stomach churned as we walked into the hearing room. The developers' lawyers sat across from us, crisp suits and briefcases lined up like soldiers. Ethan was there too, sitting in the back row, pale and hollow-eyed. When the judge called my name, I stood. My hands shook, but my voice didn't. Mrs. Hensley, the opposing attorney, began. Is it true you granted your son full power of attorney to manage your property? Yes, I said. When my husband passed, I trusted my son to handle our finances. I didn't think I had to protect my family from my family. He smirked faintly. And yet you filed an injunction claiming fraud. Do you have proof your husband's covenant is still enforceable? Frank handed the covenant to the judge. Recorded March 12, 1993, he said firmly. Never revoked. The law is clear. The lawyer turned back to me. Mrs. Hensley, what do you hope to gain from this money control? I looked at him, then at the judge. Respect, I said simply, for the people who came before me. My husband's covenant wasn't just about law, it was about love. He believed some things can't be sold: decency, legacy, dignity. I'm just keeping my word to him. For a long moment the room was silent, except for the scratching of the judge's pen. Finally, he looked up. The injunction will stand pending full review, he said. No development will proceed until this matter is resolved. Relief flooded through me so fast I could hardly stand. Frank patted my shoulder. You did it, he whispered. But when I turned toward the back of the courtroom, Ethan was already gone. That night, I sat by Robert's grave again. The wind was cool, carrying the faint smell of rain. I whispered, We stopped them, Robert. But I don't know if I've lost our son in the process. Somewhere in the trees, lightning flickered soft, distant, like an answer I couldn't quite hear. The first snow of the season came early. Thin flakes swirling over the cornfields, softening the scars left by the survey crews. The machines were long gone now, but the tension still hung in the air. The lawsuit wasn't over. Crossland had appealed, claiming emotional interference and deliberate obstruction of progress. Frank said they were grasping at straws, but I knew greed never tired easily. I spent my mornings in the kitchen sorting through stacks of papers and letters, the smell of coffee mixing with the faint scent of wood smoke from the stove. The tin box Robert left sat open beside me. I'd read his letter so many times I almost knew it by heart. Remind them. Show them that family isn't just blood, it's promise. It was that line that kept me steady. One afternoon, Frank called from his office. Margaret, he said, they've offered a settlement $500,000. They'll stop fighting if you lift the covenant. I didn't even need to think. Tell them no. He chuckled softly. I thought you'd say that, but they'll push harder. You sure you're ready for more of this? Frank, I said, I've lived through a war, a marriage, a loss, and childbirth. A few lawyers don't scare me. That made him laugh outright. Then I'll keep swinging. After I hung up, I stared out the window. Snow dusted the fence posts, the porch steps, the yard that Robert built with his hands. That land had carried our family through generations of winters. No dollar amount could buy it back once it was gone. Late that night, I heard tires crunch on the gravel driveway. The knock on the door was hesitant this time. When I opened it, Ethan stood there, coat dusted with snow. He looked thinner, his face pale and drawn. Mom, he said quietly, can I come in? I nodded and stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, the one Robert built 40 years ago. The only sound was the ticking clock and the slow hiss of the heater. Ethan rubbed his hands together. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I'm in debt, real debt. Credit cards, business loans. I thought if I sold the land, I could fix it all before you found out. My heart sank. Ethan. He shook his head, voice breaking. I never meant to hurt you. Every time I looked at that cemetery, I felt like I was still a kid, standing in Dad's shadow. Selling it felt like a way to stand on my own. I reached across the table and took his hand. You don't have to erase where you came from to prove who you are. Tears filled his eyes. I was wrong. I know that now. What do I do? Mom, how do I make this right? Start by owning what you did, I said gently. Tell the court the truth. You forged my signature. You misused the power of attorney. Fix that, and the rest will follow. He nodded silent, then wiped his eyes with his sleeve. The next morning, Frank called again. You'll never believe this, he said. Ethan just walked into my office and signed a sworn statement admitting the sale was unauthorized. That's it, Margaret. That's the nail in their coffin. Crossland's done. I closed my eyes, letting the words sink in. He really did it. He did. He even apologized to me. That boy's got courage, after all. That afternoon, I drove out to the cemetery. The gate was still chained, but I climbed over it, my boots crunching in the snow. The headstones stood quietly blanketed in white. I brushed the snow off Robert's stone and whispered, "We did it. It's over." But I knew the fight hadn't just been about keeping land. It was about holding on to something that the world keeps trying to sell dignity memory roots. A week later, Ethan came by again, this time with a shovel in the truck bed. I thought we could fix the fence, he said. We worked side by side in the cold, setting new posts and straightening the rails. When we finished, the sun was setting, gold light glinting off the snow. We stood together quiet, watching the light fade. Then Ethan said softly, "Dad was right, wasn't he? About keeping promises." I nodded. Always was. He smiled faintly. "You know, I was thinking about starting over, doing something that actually means something. Maybe landscaping, maybe restoration. Something that fixes what's broken instead of tearing it down." That sounds like something your father would have been proud of. That night, when I came back home, I sat by the fire with a cup of tea. The flickering light cast shadows on the walls, and for the first time in months, the house didn't feel empty. I reached into the tin box one last time and found the small gold key Robert had left. I'd never figured out what it unlocked. On instinct, I walked to the hall closet, the old cedar one Robert built himself. The lock was tiny, nearly hidden. The key slid in perfectly. Inside was a single envelope. My breath caught as I opened it. "If you're reading this," Margaret Robert had written, "then you've done what I hoped. You fought for what matters. The deed to the cemetery stays with you. But if one day our son finds his way back, let him have a part of it again. That's the only way this promise lives on." I closed the envelope, tears warming my cheeks. The next day, I brought Ethan to the cemetery. We walked to Robert's grave and I handed him the letter. He read it silently, then folded it carefully and placed it in his coat pocket. "I'll take care of it, Mom," he said. "I swear." "I know you will." We stood there until the sun dipped below the trees, the sky burning orange and pink. The snow gleamed faintly under the fading light. When we turned to leave, I looked back once more. The cemetery was still, but it no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like home again. Spring came slowly that year, like the earth had forgotten how to thaw. The snow melted in streaks across the fields, leaving behind soft mud and the first signs of green. The cemetery looked almost alive again, wildflowers pushing through the churned dirt, robins pecking along the fence. For the first time in months, the land felt peaceful. I started spending my mornings there, trimming grass and repainting the old fence. The silence wasn't lonely anymore, it was restorative. People from town sometimes stopped to help, unasked. Pastor Dale showed up one Saturday with a rake. He didn't say much. He just worked beside me until the light began to fade. That's how people in Indiana say they care, through quiet company. Ethan came by most Sundays. At first, he didn't talk. He'd walk the rows, brush the snow from the stones, then stand by Robert's grave, his hands deep in his jacket pockets. One day, he finally said, "I sold something that didn't belong to me, and I can't stop thinking about it. "You've already done the hardest part," I said. "You told the truth." He nodded. "It doesn't feel like enough." "Maybe it never will," I said. "But we don't fix the past, we tend it." Later that month, a letter arrived from Frank. The court's final ruling was printed in thick, formal language. The covenant stood firm. The land would remain protected forever. I set the paper on the table beside Robert's photo and whispered, "We won." Ethan came over that evening carrying 2 plates from the diner: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and cornbread. We ate at the same kitchen table where our family had shared every meal for decades. He told me he'd sold his truck, paid down some of the debt, and was planning to start over. "I want to build something this time," he said, "not tear anything down." I smiled. "You've already started." After dinner, we walked outside. The sky was painted pink and gold, the kind of sunset Robert always said meant clear skies tomorrow. The porch light flickered on automatically. Ethan leaned against the railing, looking out over the yard. "I've been thinking," he said. "Maybe I could start a landscaping business. Small, just me and a truck. I'll call it Rooted Groundworks. Dad used to say there's honor in keeping the earth tended." "That sounds right," I said softly. He looked down at his hands. "You really forgive me." "I already did," I said. "The rest is up to you." We stood there for a while, listening to the crickets rise from the fields, watching the light shift from gold to silver. For once, silence didn't hurt. It felt like healing. On the last Monday of May, Pastor Dale asked if the town could hold its Memorial Day service on our land. The town's cemetery was under repair, and the Hensley property had become a quiet, beautiful space again. I agreed. That morning, people gathered with folding chairs and flags. Veterans in uniform saluted as the wind rippled through the trees. The pastor spoke about sacrifice routes and the duty of the living to honor the dead. When the bugle played taps, the sound carried over the fields, soft and clear. Ethan stood beside me, head bowed. When the ceremony ended, he knelt by Robert's grave and laid a small bouquet of wildflowers. He didn't say a word, just rested his palm on the stone for a moment before standing again. We watched as families lingered, sharing stories, children laughing between the headstones. For the first time since this all began, I felt that the cemetery had returned to what it was always meant to be, a place not of loss, but of belonging. That evening, we sat on the porch, 2 mugs of tea between us. The fireflies started to rise from the grass, blinking in slow rhythm. Ethan turned to me. "You ever think Dad can see us?" "All the time," I said, smiling. "I think he's right where he's supposed to be, making sure we remember what matters." He nodded, watching the horizon fade into blue. "Then I guess we're home." I looked at the porch light glowing softly above us. "Yes," I said. "We are." The light stayed steady against the night, casting its warm glow across the porch, the fence, and the field beyond, over everything we'd fought for, and finally learned to keep. Summer settled over Indiana like a slow breath. The air grew thick with honeysuckle and the hum of cicadas, and the evenings stretched long and golden. The cemetery, once a battleground, now looked almost tender. Grass swayed over the graves, and sunlight filtered through the oak branches like forgiveness itself. I spent most mornings out there trimming weeds or brushing leaves from the stones. The rhythm of it calmed me, rake step breathe. After all the noise and paperwork, silence felt like a blessing. Ethan stopped by nearly every day now. Sometimes he'd bring sandwiches from the diner or a bag of tools for the fence. He didn't talk much while we worked, but that was all right. We'd said what needed saying. The rest was quiet understanding. One afternoon, he showed up with a sign he'd carved himself, "Hensley Memorial Grounds." The letters were clean and deep, polished, smooth by his hands. "If this place is going to stand," he said, "it should have a name that means something." I ran my fingers along the letters, feeling the grooves. "Your father would have liked that," I said. He smiled faintly. "I think so too." Not long after, a letter arrived from the county office. They wanted to designate the property as a protected heritage site, ensuring no future development could ever touch it. The process would take a few months and a public hearing, but I didn't mind. I signed the papers that same afternoon, tears blurring the ink. That night, I walked to the cemetery alone. The moon hung full over the fields, bathing the headstones in silver light. I sat on the bench Robert had built, still sturdy after all these years, and whispered, "We did it, love. It's safe. He's home." The wind rustled through the trees, and I could almost imagine him answering not in words, but in the hush that followed, the kind of peace that only comes when something broken has finally healed. Weeks passed. Summer deepened. People began to visit the grounds, old neighbors, veterans' families who'd moved away and come back just to see it. Pastor Dale held an evening service one Sunday, reading softly from the Psalms as fireflies blinked around us. Afterward, folks lingered. Some brought flowers, others told stories about Robert or my parents. The sound of laughter mixed with the chirping crickets, and for a moment I realized this wasn't just a cemetery anymore. It was a living place full of memory, kindness, and belonging. Ethan's landscaping business began to grow too. He called it Rooted Groundworks, just like he'd said he would. His first clients were local families wanting help maintaining their old farm lots. "It's honest work," he told me one evening as we shared pie on the porch. "Feels like something worth doing." I smiled. There's honor in keeping things alive. He looked down at his hands, then at me. "Mom, I still think about what I did. Every time I see that gate, I remember how close I came to losing everything. I don't know how to forgive myself." "You don't have to forget it," I said. "Just live like you remember. That's how forgiveness works." He nodded slowly, eyes wet in the porch light. "You ever think Dad can see us?" I looked toward the cemetery, just visible through the trees. "Oh, he's watching. Probably shaking his head at us right now." Ethan laughed softly, and the sound warmed the night. As the weeks went on, the Heritage Board's approval came through. The property was officially listed as Hensley Family Memorial Heritage Grounds. The certificate arrived in the mail, embossed and formal, and I framed it right next to Robert's photograph. That evening, I recorded the final chapter of my story for a local podcast. Pastor Dale had encouraged me to join her revenge story, they called it. The mic blinked red as I spoke. If you're hearing this, maybe you've lost something too. Maybe it wasn't land or money, but something deeper. Trust peace, the feeling of home. Don't let the world convince you it's too late to reclaim it. You can always guard what roots you, no matter how much time has passed. I paused, listening to the crickets through the open window. The truth is, revenge doesn't always mean destroying someone. Sometimes it means restoring what they tried to take: your dignity, your faith, your voice. I learned that from the land itself, because the earth remembers who tends it, and so does love. When I finished recording, I walked out to the porch. The sun was setting, the sky painted orange and lavender. The porch light flickered on, automatically casting a warm glow across the yard. Ethan joined me with 2 mugs of tea. We sat quietly, watching the fireflies rise from the grass. The house, the land, the graves, everything glowed with that soft, forgiving light. "If this story found you tonight," I said softly into the evening air, "maybe it's because something in your life is worth protecting too. Don't wait for the world to tell you it's gone. Some things once rooted in love never really die." The wind carried the words away, gentle as a prayer. I reached over, took Ethan's hand, and squeezed it. "Thank you for coming home," I whispered. He smiled, eyes glistening in the golden light. "I never really left, Mom. I just forgot where home was." We sat there until the stars came out. The light over the porch, steady as a heartbeat. The same light Robert had wired years ago, the one that always turned on right before dark. It glowed, still faithful and warm, watching over all that we'd lost and all that we'd reclaimed.